Hi there. Maybe I should be a little bit more modest in my analysis and my name giving, but for a while I've had a name for the corporate government that the US has, and I call it the death cult. Why? Well, because you can clearly, logically deduce that they are self-destructing, that they are masochistic, and that they basically are actively making sure that they themselves and humanity eventually dies. Everything is destroyed. All life on Earth has to be destroyed. And that's because they serve the oil credit system, because they're addicted to oil. They've made all the industry require fossil inputs, so they cannot really stop. And at the moment the US is controlled by corporations. We know that, that's not news. It really shows when you have these debt ceiling discussions, and there's really no original thought in the minds of these Congress people. The only thing they can do very well is lie about the corporate legislation that they want to create. There are so many examples of that. Like recently there was a law changed that says, well, things can be more radioactive in the environment. There can be more radioactivity. So the levels of background radiation from iodine 229 or 132 the allowance will be higher, so that of course alarms don't go off that quickly. And because they're going to produce strontium nuclear batteries, they're really tiny and they generate beta particles or something like that, and you can run. Their batteries, they last 30 years. Of course, after a while they will be discarded and abandoned in the environment, and all that stuff will come around. And well, if you set the standards in a level which is there to protect humans from cancer and the negative impact of radiation, then the alarms would go off. But if you just increase the standards, then there's no problem. It's a death cult, and the problem with running a country by a death cult is that the whole country becomes a huge liability to the world. And the fact that fossil fuels are running out and there's not really a strong alternative at the moment means that the country starts turning into a more desperate, in a more desperate, enters a more desperate negotiation position in any situation. So it's a little bit like a heroin addict. First it's a beautiful woman, then she gets addicted to heroin, and she's supplied, so she feels good, and it doesn't have to be negative. But after a while, she doesn't have the money to buy proper food anymore, and she has to prostitute herself, and she sells her organs in the end, and then of course she dies. That's and she, if it's a he, or a she, it becomes criminal. The behavior becomes completely immoral, and that's what. And so you have a country which is run by a group of companies that do not care about health or humanity in general, and the country is desperate. It will do anything in order to keep going. It's addicted. That's not going to end well. That means that if you allow that to continue, then you're going to have all kinds of news from the US which really is shocking, like I don't know, they have a nuclear power plant failure, this thing explodes like Fukushima, but nobody's there to do anything about it because they don't have the capacity anymore. Like what you read now, that Shell is going to drill in the Arctic with permission of the US. That's fine for the death cult, which only recognizes their own lifetime as a measure of whether they are doing good or not, or doing it. They say, okay, next generation, their problem. But you don't want that. You don't want that type of weakness and desperation and lack of responsibility towards other people to be governing a country. So what has to happen, I think, is that we will have to have a global coalition of countries to say to the US, you're going to change your government, you're going to replace it by a functioning body, one that acknowledges solutions to problems and does not try to do dental work with a hammer or something like that. It's just horrible. it has to be removed, and it can be removed when there's foreign pressure, and there's, it's really weird, and it shows you how Shell is a ultranational yeah, is above countries and is above the law, because it should be a political decision for it to drill in the Arctic. And maybe it's the Dutch fault that we want to have some oil to sell and some revenues for Holland. I'm not sure how much of the Shell revenues flow through Holland, but I think it's still a considerable amount, considering that the head office is here in The Hague. But there should be a different attitude. And once you replace the death cult with the counter cult, say the life cult, the sun, the mentality that acknowledges the potential of renewables to support life and bring life and enable it, it's a completely different story, because you have enough energy in the US to make green pastures out of every dry spot that is there, every part of the desert. You have enough manpower there to make all kinds of renewable power sources, to have bakeries, to make fertilizer, to do everything that you want, to desalinate water, to clean water, to purify the air. It's unbelievable. The potential is there. And especially when people are already thrown back into a more low carbon lifestyle, which they will lament in the beginning, well, then they will start to recognize that it's not much different, because that's how the brain works. It will be happy. It's a relativistic thing. If you think you can attain something great, but you're not succeeding, you're very unhappy. But if you know that you cannot really attain it anymore, then you're not going to make yourself unhappy because of that. Once it eliminates the death cult from its government, which I think is the minimum requirement for a country to be, well, to be considered a serious country at all, then it's a completely different story. It's completely the opposite of what's happening right now, I think. And it will be wealthy in, well, you have to think about how much manpower does it take to create enough renewable energies in order to create a comfortable level of a society with the same population, by the way. You don't need fossil fuels for that. You just have to do things different. I think 15 years it would take for everybody to work on that and prioritize making renewables, because that also creates your food, so you have to do it if you don't have the oil or if you don't get the oil from other countries. Because at the same time, of course, other countries are chipping away at the ability of the US to get fossil resources because they want them themselves. But the other countries are also free, are not too desperate to develop renewable resources. The biggest example is, of course, Germany, but all around the world, everybody's recognizing, hey, listen, renewable resources are just another type of oil. We can embrace it, and it makes life much easier, because we don't have the logistics, we don't have the dependency, we don't have the control, we don't have the disturbance, we don't have the pollution. And we get a lot of jobs out of it in the beginning. And then we don't have to work anymore if we automate everything. So anyway, this is my video about the US death cult. And I think that, so what I'm expecting is that before long there will be an international coalition in order to manage the US out of their addiction. And why the US? Primarily because it has such a large army, and it's really, so you will have, I think, and this is of course complete fantasy, but Obama will sign an agreement with a China, Russian, South American coalition of countries in order to have a mutual exchange of renewable resources in return for abandoning plans to drill in the Arctic and increase tar sands. Why? Because humanity has to continue longer than it is now likely to continue, and I don't give it more than a couple of, well, maybe 1,000 years. That would be extremely lucky. Another thing, and I base that on the fact that the oceans are anoxic and they start to produce toxic fumes, and we really can't deal with that. That's already happening in France. I wanted to say something about gold. I think that people that are in the US and say, well, gold has to reset to $30,000 in order for the global economy to continue. That's not going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. Gold will become more of a currency and will become more valuable, but it's not going to solve the problems of the US. That's like you're playing Monopoly or you're playing a game and somebody in the corner says, well, I only have a paperclip, but this paperclip is worth $1 million. Haha. So now I can pay you with it. No, that's not how it works. Let's all move to a system like, I have this paperclip. Do you have a paperclip? No, you don't? Okay, that sucks for you then. Now I'm the most rich person in the world. No, that's not how it's going to work. I think that the world will require the US to pay with gold, and once all the gold has been confiscated and ran out, it might run its own or its extra US economy, and even with including the US economy with gold. But it's not the relationship with dollars is not going to be relevant, and it's a question whether the euro will try to it's already trying to detach from the dollar. So it will not, in euro terms, it will not be it will be more expensive gold, but it will not it cannot be used to solve the problems of the US, I believe. That doesn't mean that if you're in the US, you definitely should buy it. Definitely. Because it's going to be, what is true, is it's going to be a seriously respected means of exchange. Anyway, I hope this is interesting, and thanks for listening.